The late afternoon sun bled through a dusty haze over the eastern Afghan mountains, painting the jagged peaks in shades of rust and shadow. The airstrip at Forward Operating Base Harrison shimmered with heat waves, the kind that made the horizon look like molten glass. Captain Erin "Hawk" Matthews sat in her A-10 Thunderbolt II, helmet resting on her knee, waiting for the green light to taxi for a routine patrol. It had been another long day in a deployment that blurred weeks into months. She'd flown 3 sorties already, 2 uneventful shows of force over friendly villages, and 1 armed escort for a convoy that never even took fire. Now she was running through pre-flight checks, eyes half on her console and half on the flight line, where crew chiefs moved with deliberate urgency. Then she heard it. A voice crackled over an open UHF channel, cutting across the static. Harsh, strained, and far too calm for the words it carried. "Mayday, mayday. This is Blackjack 2-1. We are pinned. Taking heavy fire. 2 wounded. Coordinates follow." The transmission broke, replaced by the unmistakable rattle of automatic gunfire in the background. Erin froze. Blackjack 2-1. That was a Navy SEAL call sign. She'd heard it before, weeks ago, during joint briefings. They were operating somewhere in the mountains, often beyond the regular Army patrol zones. If they were calling on this frequency, it meant their primary comms were down. And if they were calling for help now, Erin reached for her knee pad, scribbling the coordinates before the transmission cut entirely. Her eyes flicked to her own mission card. The grid location the SEAL had called out was dangerously far outside her assigned patrol sector. She keyed her radio to her own command net. "Base Ops, this is Hawk. I've got a distress call on guard from Blackjack 2-1. They're pinned at grid." She read off the coordinates, listening to the silence that followed. When command finally replied, the voice was flat. "Hawk, copy those coordinates. Stand by. That's outside your tasking. Other assets are being redirected." Erin glanced at the map display in her cockpit. Redirected assets? The nearest CAS birds on station were at least 40 minutes away, if not more. The SEAL team wouldn't last half that long under-sustained. Fire. She could almost hear the clock ticking. "Ops Hawk, I can be overhead in 14 minutes. A pause. Then, "Negative, Hawk. That's a no-go. You'd be outside AWACS coverage without fighter escort. Hostile air defense presence is probable. Hold your position for your assigned mission." Erin leaned back in her seat, staring at the mountains in the distance. She'd flown in and out of those valleys before. Low, fast, dangerous. She knew exactly how bad it could be. Every pilot did. But she also knew what would happen if those coordinates became nothing more than a grid on a recovery report. Her hand hovered over the throttle. She thought of the SEALs men she didn't know personally, but whose missions she'd occasionally supported. They'd been the ones to clear compounds so air crews could land safely. They'd been the ones to run into enemy strongholds when the rest of the force stayed back. If they were calling her now, whether they knew it or not, it meant no one else was answering. She checked her fuel load. Enough for a one-way dash in and a dicey return if she didn't loiter too long. Weapons, full loadout. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon was locked and ready, and she had a mix of a GM-65 Mavericks and Hydra rockets. Her wingman's jet was still down for maintenance. If she went, she was going alone. She flipped the battery master switch. The Warthog came. Alive, the low growl of twin turbofans rolling across the flight line. Crew Chief Sergeant Lopez looked up from his toolbox, eyes narrowing. He jogged over, tapping on her canopy as she lowered it. "Ma'am, thought you were wheels up in 20? Erin's mouth tightened into a thin smile. Change of plans, Lopez didn't ask. He just stepped back, giving her a thumbs up. As the chocks came off, He'd been around long enough to recognize that look in a pilot's eyes, the one that meant someone else's life was hanging in the balance. She taxied out, calling over the radio, "Tower, Hawk departing single ship," for immediate tasking. The tower controller's hesitation was audible. "Hawk, Roger. Cleared for takeoff runway 22. She didn't wait for further discussion. The engines screamed as she pushed them to full military power. The Warthog's nose lifted, and the tarmac fell away beneath her. Ahead, the mountains loomed, jagged silhouettes in the golden light. Inside her helmet, her breathing slowed. She kept the altimeter low, hugging the desert floor to stay beneath enemy radar. Her hands were steady, but her mind was a storm of calculations. Distance, time on station, fuel burn, possible threats. She thought about the warnings from command. Alone, no AWACS, no escort. Man pads probable. Then she thought about Blackjack 2-1's voice. Calm, controlled, already halfway to fatal acceptance. She tightened her grip on the stick. "Hang on, boys," she murmured to no one but herself. "I'm coming." The sun was dipping behind the peaks as she pushed the throttle harder, the Warthog's frame vibrating with the effort. The world blurred past rock, sand, scattered villages. Somewhere out there, in the shadow of those mountains, men were fighting for their lives. And against every order she'd been given, Aaron Matthews was going to be the one who got to them first. The desert gave way to jagged brown ridges as Aaron Matthews kept the A-10 low, her altimeter barely kissing 300 feet. Her eyes scanned the terrain ahead, her mind constantly balancing three things: threat avoidance, fuel burn, and time. Every second mattered too high, and she'd be spotted by radar. Too low, and a stray ridge could end her mission before it began. Her HUD glowed with waypoints she'd punched in by hand, an improvised route that threaded through valleys and used the terrain as cover. The coordinates of the SEAL's last transmission pulsed at the edge of the display, almost mocking her. With the distance still left to close, she checked the fuel gauge again. Her mental math told her she'd have maybe 8 minutes on Station 10 at the absolute most before she'd have to turn back or risk ditching somewhere she really didn't want to land. That wasn't a lot of time to find a firefight, identify friend from foe, and clear a path for extraction. "Hawk, this is base ops," a voice finally crackled in her headset. "You are in violation of mission parameters. You are ordered to return to base immediately." "Repeat, return to base." Erin's jaw clenched. She didn't answer. Instead, she toggled to her backup channel 1 that ops wouldn't be monitoring and kept flying. The radio hissed with intermittent static, the kind you get when a signal is bouncing off uneven terrain. Then, a faint, barely there voice bled through. "Blackjack 2-1, still engaged, ammo low, multiple casualties." Her grip tightened on the stick. They were still alive, still fighting. But the tone told her everything: fatigue, adrenaline, and the grim awareness that they were running out of both ammo and time. She adjusted her heading slightly, cutting the distance by another mile. The A-10 vibrated with the subtle turbulence of low-level flight, the smell of hot electronics and faint hydraulic fluid filling the cockpit. A flash of movement on the ridge ahead caught her eye. She dropped her right wing, scanning. There a glint of glass, sunlight bouncing off something metallic. She rolled left hard, staying just low enough that whatever was up there wouldn't get a clean lock. The valley she was about to enter was one she'd heard other pilots call the Canyon of No Return. Steep walls, narrow turns. Perfect for an ambush. She pulled up slightly to get a better look at her entry point and rolled back down, skimming the tree line. In her ear, the AWACS frequency came alive, though faint and distant. "Hawk, we're tracking your transponder. You're outside our coverage area." Surface to air thrubbable. Last chance to turn back. Erin toggled her mic, her voice calm but final. Copy. Proceeding to target. The silence that followed said everything either. They didn't know how to stop her, or they knew she'd made up her mind and didn't want to waste more breath. Minutes later, the terrain tightened around her. She adjusted power, keeping her nose slightly down to maintain speed without climbing. The Warthog wasn't built for supersonic dash. It was built to loiter, to take damage, to deliver hell up. Close and personal. That meant in enemy territory, you didn't outrun danger, you outlasted it. Her eyes flicked again to the map. Just over the next set of ridges, the SEAL's coordinates blinked steadily. She pictured them in her mind. 6 or 8 men, spread thin inside whatever cover they could find, weapons hot, backs to the wall. She'd seen teams like that before in her career, too far from friendlies, too close to the enemy, and dangerously close to disappearing into a line in a casualty report. And she remembered something else, a dusty FIAB briefing room, months earlier. A SEAL, broad-shouldered and quiet, had said during a joint briefing, "If we call, we don't care who answers. Just answer." The memory lit something inside her. The zh. Radio snapped again, this time not command, but a faint burst of gunfire in the background of another transmission. Incoming from the North Ridge, mortar landing inside compound, where the transmission cut. Erin's stomach tightened. She eased back slightly on the throttle, enough to stabilize for a moment. Her fingers danced over the weapons panel. Master arm, on. Cannon, live. Mavericks, hot. Hydropods, ready. A sudden burst of tracers arced up from the canyon wall to her left. She instinctively banked right, pulling a hard turn that pressed her into the seat. The A-10 groaned under the G-load, but held. That was her reminder the SEALs weren't the only ones in the fight. Whatever she was about to fly into, the enemy had already locked the terrain down with overlapping fields of fire. She took a slow breath through her oxygen mask, steadying her heartbeat. Then she pushed the throttle forward again. The Warthog surged toward the mouth of the canyon, the sun now a fading orange glow behind her. In the shadows ahead, she could almost feel the fight waiting for her hidden muzzle flashes. The echoes of explosions, the chaos of men trying to survive in a place designed to kill them. Alone, without escort, without radar coverage, Erin Matthews kept flying toward it. And somewhere, deep down, she knew there was no turning back. The canyon mouth yawned ahead, like the open jaws of some ancient predator. She'd seen it on satellite imagery during mission briefings, a deep scar carved into the mountains, twisting back on itself in tight bends, its sheer cliffs rising so high they swallowed the light. Pilots called it the Valley of No Return for a reason. Once inside, the walls blocked most radio signals, and the sharp turns made it nearly impossible to maneuver out if you ran into trouble. Erin dropped even lower, her altimeter reading barely. 200 feet. The terrain blurred beneath her. Patches of scrub trees and jagged rock whipped by in streaks of brown and green. At this altitude, every movement had to be deliberate. 1 second of distraction, and a wingtip could clip stone, tearing the aircraft apart. The A-10's engines growled steadily behind her, their sound swallowed by the canyon walls. Her eyes darted constantly from the HUD to the terrain, back to the HUD searching for signs of the enemy. Her threat warning receiver beeped once then twice in quick succession. A radar lock attempt. She banked sharply left, hugging the curve of the canyon wall, so tight she could see individual cracks in the rock face. The warning stopped. For a moment, only the sound of the engines filled her helmet. Then she saw a flicker of movement on the cliff above, followed by a flash of light. Instinct took over. She kicked the rudder, swinging the nose just enough to break the angle, as tracer fire ripped through the space she'd occupied a second earlier. The rounds glowed orange in the dim canyon light, their arcs ending in bursts of rock where they struck the wall. Her breathing stayed slow, steady. Panic got pilots killed in places like this. She pulled the nose up slightly to clear a rock outcropping, then dropped back down immediately, staying under the line of sight from higher ground as much as possible. Every second she stayed airborne here increased the chance of an ambush, but every second also brought her closer to the seals. She scanned ahead, and there it was, a faint ribbon of smoke curling upward from a bend in the canyon. It wasn't thick enough to be a fire. It was the kind of signal you made when you wanted to be seen, but not by everyone. She keyed her mic to the guard frequency, the emergency channel that anyone could hear. Blackjack 2-1, this is Hawk, 1 mic out. Pop green smoke if you can hear me. Static, then faint, broken. Copy, green smoke, northwest. Watch the ridge. Erin smiled tightly inside her mask. They were alive. She rolled the A-10 into a banking turn to line up with the smoke's location, her eyes scanning for threats. That's when the ridge above the smoke erupted in muzzle flashes. The enemy had seen her coming. A burst of 12.7 millimeters heavy machine gun. Fire lanced upward, the tracers bright enough to burn into her vision. She pushed the stick forward, diving closer to the canyon floor until the treetops seemed close enough to touch. Her thumb hovered over the weapon select, but she didn't fire yet. At this speed and angle, she needed a clean pass to make every round count. The smell of hot metal and oil filled the cockpit as she adjusted the throttle, the GAU-8's massive drum spinning up in preparation. She could feel it in her bones, the deep, thudding vibration that no other aircraft in the world delivered quite like the Warthog. "Hang on, Blackjack," she muttered under her breath. "I've got you." The smoke marker came into full view, now green, curling upward from behind a cluster of ruined stone buildings at the canyon's bend. The place was old, maybe centuries, but it had enough walls left to give the seals partial cover. She could see movement, small, dark figures shifting position under the rubble. Between them and her was a ridge crawling with enemy fighters, trucks with mounted weapons. RPG teams crouched in the shadows. Mortar tubes angled skyward. It was an entire ambush site, and she was flying straight into it. Perfect. She leveled the nose, locked her pipper on the nearest technical truck, and squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon roared to life. 30mm shells tore across the ridge line, each one punching through armor and steel like paper. The truck's engine block exploded in a bloom of fire and smoke, the crew scattering in panic. Erin rolled slightly right, walking her rounds across the mortar position, silencing it in a cloud of dust and shrapnel. The enemy's return fire intensified. Small arms stitched the air around her. Tracer lines reached up in desperate arcs. A single burst smacked into the fuselage, just aft of her cockpit, the dull thud sending vibrations through the frame. She ignored it, pulling up and banking sharply to avoid slamming into the canyon wall. The SEALs would have a few precious seconds now to reposition, but the fight was far from over. Climbing slightly, she checked her fuel again. A margin for error was vanishing fast. She had minutes, maybe less, before she'd have to decide whether to break off or risk running out of fuel in hostile airspace. But looking down at the smoke marker and the tiny figures moving beneath it, she already knew the answer. This wasn't going to be a single pass. Not tonight. The compound's outer wall was little more than a jagged outline of ancient stone, pockmarked from centuries of weather, and now shredded by machine gun fire. Every incoming round tore more from it, spraying the air with dust and fragments. Chief Petty Officer Mason Riker crouched behind a low section of wall, M4 cradled in his hands, ears ringing from the last mortar blast that had landed too close. His world was reduced to three things: the rattle of gunfire, the acrid bite of smoke, and the heavy, stifling heat pressing through his body armor. To his right, Petty Officer First Class Torres was hunched over Petty Officer Wilkes, who lay on his back, pale and bleeding from a leg wound. Torres had cinched a tourniquet high on the thigh, but the blood kept seeping through. "How's he doing?" Mason shouted over the chaos. Torres didn't look up. "Won't matter if we don't get him out of here in the next 10 minutes. Mason risked a glance over the wall. The Northridge was crawling with fighters, at least 2 technicals with mounted guns, a handful of RPG teams shifting positions, and who knew how many more out of sight. Every time one of his men moved, a fresh burst of fire stitched the ground around them. The east side wasn't any better. The canyon narrowed there, funneling enemy fighters right toward them. Mason had placed the team's last 2 claymores there, but he knew they'd only buy seconds. "Ammo check," he yelled. A chorus of replies came back. 2 mags. 3 left, down to my last. Mason gritted his teeth. They'd started the mission loaded for a short in-and-out raid. Now they were in a siege with no resupply and no air cover, at least none that had answered yet. Then, above the crack and thud of gunfire, a new sound reached his ears. Low, heavy, a deep, rolling growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground. At first, he thought it was another vehicle coming through the canyon. Then the sound grew, filling the air with a rising metallic snarl. Recognition hit him like a jolt. He'd heard it before on other deployments, always in moments like this. The A-10 Warthog. He keyed his radio instantly, shouting over the gunfire. "Hog inbound! Hold your fire, she's ours!" The team erupted in movement, each man finding cover that gave them a clear view of the ridge without putting them in. The Warthog's line of fire. Seconds later she appeared. The A-10 came screaming over the canyon bend at treetop height, her broad wings nearly brushing the cliff walls. The nose gun was already spinning, the faint whine building toward its signature roar. Sunlight caught her gray fuselage, scarred and weathered from countless missions. Then the sound hit the GAU-8 Avenger cannon, unleashing hell. It wasn't just a noise. It was a physical force, a chainsaw growl magnified 1,000 times, each 30 millimeters round slamming into the ridge with bone-crushing precision. Mason watched one of the technicals vanish in a fireball, its mounted gun cartwheeling into the rocks. The ridge erupted in chaos. Enemy fighters scattered, some diving for cover, others firing wildly at the A-10 as she pulled up and banked hard. For another pass. Mason felt a surge of hope, rare and dangerous in a place like this. Hope could make you careless. But in that moment, with the Warthog's shadow passing over him, it felt like the first break they'd had all day. "Reload. Get ready to move when she gives us an opening," Mason barked, slapping a fresh mag into his rifle. Torres shouted from behind him. "Riker, you think she's alone?" Mason ducked as a burst of rounds chewed the wall above him. "She's low and unescorted," he replied. "No AWACS, no wingman. She's burning fuel just to be here." That meant she'd only have minutes to work before she had to break off or risk being shot down. A burst of static hissed in his ear, followed by a woman's voice, calm, precise, unfazed by the chaos. "Blackjack 2-1, this is Hawk. I'm on station. I'll clear you a path north ridge first, then East Canyon. Pop green smoke when you're ready to move." Mason grabbed the smoke grenade from his vest, yanked the pin, and lobbed it into the open. The canister hissed, sending up a curling plume of vivid green. "Smoke out. Reach priority," he shouted. Almost instantly, the A-10 dropped in for her second pass. The cannon tore into the north ridge again, walking fire across the enemy positions with surgical precision. Rocks and dirt exploded upward, obscuring the fighter's line of sight. The second technical went up in flames, the gunner thrown clear. The enemy fire slackened, not gone, but less coordinated. It was the first opening they'd had all day. Mason didn't waste it. Torres, get Wilkes ready to move. Carter, Daniels, you're on point for the East Canyon. The men shifted, keeping low. Above them, the A-10 banked sharply, lining up for what Mason guessed would be a run on the eastern choke point. He'd seen close air support before, but this was something different, low, aggressive, and utterly unafraid of being in the thick of the fight. For the first time in hours, Mason allowed himself to think, we might make it out of here alive. Erin's gloved hand tightened around the stick as she banked hard left, the gi forces pressing her into the seat. The A-10's canopy frame rattled, the desert canyon flashing past just feet below her wingtips. She could almost feel the seals. Eyes on her from the ground, though they were just dots among the dust and chaos. Her HUD was alive with symbols, target markers, range data, threat warnings, each one a reminder that she was deep in hostile airspace without an escort. The warning receiver screamed again, painting her with radar from somewhere on the ridge. Ignore it. Stay low. Stay fast. She leveled out and lined up on the eastern canyon. From this angle, the enemy fighters were still pouring in reinforcements, drawn by the sound of battle. Their heads were turned toward the SEAL's position, not upward. Bad mistake. Her thumb slid to the master arm switch. The HUD's green symbols went hot. She squeezed the trigger, and the GAU-8 roared to life again. The sound filled the cockpit, vibrating through her bones. The nose of the Warthog shuddered under the force of the cannon's spin. Below her, the 30mm rounds tore through the lead elements, dust, debris, and men flung like ragdolls. She released the trigger just long enough to reposition, then fired again, walking the stream of fire down the canyon like a surgeon's scalpel. RPG teams vanished in flashes. Trucks buckled and burned. A pair of muzzle flashes flared from the ridge to her right. She felt the thunk of small arms rounds hitting the armor plating beneath her seat. The A-10 could take it. She'd flown her share of damaged birds, but every hit was a reminder she couldn't hang here forever. Blackjack 2-1, she said into her mic, voice steady. Canyon clear for 30 seconds. Move now. Through her side window, she caught movement, 5 figures breaking from cover, hauling a 6th between them. The SEALs were moving, just as she'd hoped. She circled hard, keeping herself between them and the ridge, daring the enemy to aim at her instead. Then a new voice crackled in her headset, strained with urgency. Hawk, be advised, enemy armor is inbound from the west BMP with autocannon. Her stomach tightened. That changed everything. The A-10 could destroy armor easily, but only if she struck first. If the BMP got line of sight on the SEALs, it would shred them in seconds. Copy. Mark target, Erin replied, already banking to intercept. She spotted it a moment later, a squat, ugly silhouette bouncing along a dirt track, turret swiveling toward the fight. She dropped altitude even more, skimming the ground so low she could see individual tufts of scrub brush blur beneath her. This would be tight, too tight. Her targeting reticle snapped over the BMP, range ticking down fast. At 1,500 meters, she squeezed the trigger. The Avenger spat fire, the first burst tearing through the vehicle's thin frontal armor. A second burst hit the turret, freezing it mid-rotation. The BMP exploded in a blossoming fireball, black smoke curling upward. Armor neutralized, she called. Continue exfil. But there was no time to savor the hit. Her warning receiver wailed again, this time sharper. She glanced at the panel. The tone wasn't from small arms. It was a Manpad's shoulder-fired missile. Missile. breaking left. She barked to no one in particular, yanking the stick and slamming the throttle. Forward, the A-10 rolled almost onto her wingtip, flares popping from the dispensers in a stream of dazzling fire. Through the side glass, she caught sight of the smoke trail as the missile spiraled harmlessly into the canyon wall. She was breathing hard now, but her voice stayed even on the net. Blackjack 2-1, you're clear for 2 clicks east. I'll cover your 6. She climbed just enough to get visual on their escape route. The SEALs were moving fast, Wilkes slung between 2 men, the others scanning and firing short bursts to keep pursuers down. Erin kept her nose pointed toward the most likely approach routes for enemy reinforcements, making short strafing passes whenever she saw movement. On one pass, she came in so low she could see Mason, the team leader, look up at her and throw a quick hand signal. It wasn't a formal salute, just a quick flash of gratitude before he turned back to covering his team's retreat. By now her fuel warning was nagging her. She checked her gauge. She'd burned more than planned getting in this deep, and every low-level turn had chewed through more. Another 5 minutes here, and she'd be rolling the dice on making it back to base. But 5 minutes was what they needed. She made one final pass over the canyon mouth, emptying the last of her cannon rounds into a cluster of enemy vehicles trying to block the SEAL's route. The explosions lit the fading sky, the shockwaves rippling up to her cockpit. Hawk. This is Blackjack 2-1. Mason's voice came through at last, strained but alive. We are clear of contact. You've got our eternal thanks. Erin allowed herself a small, tired smile. Roger that, Blackjack. Good hunting out there. She pulled up into a climbing turn, the Warthog's engines groaning as she headed for friendly airspace. Behind her, the canyon was quiet now, at least for a little while. The SEALs would live to fight another day. And for Erin, that was all that mattered. The airbase runway stretched out ahead, a thin strip of gray in the fading desert light. Erin eased back the throttle, lowering the landing gear. The A-10's tired engines groaned in protest after the punishing low-level run, but they held together. Her mind replayed the mission in sharp flashes, the SEALs breaking cover, the BMP's explosion, the missiles spiraling into the rocks. And Wilkes, limp between 2 teammates, still alive when she'd last seen him. The tires hit the tarmac with a satisfying thump, the Warthog bouncing once before settling. She deployed the speed brakes, slowing to a steady taxi toward her hangar. Mechanics and ground crew watched from the edge of the ramp, some shaking their heads, others grinning like they'd just seen a legend in the making. She popped the canopy, the sudden rush of warm desert air filling the cockpit. By the time she rolled to a stop, a crew chief was already climbing the ladder. "Ma'am," he said with a knowing smirk, "you lit up the range map like a Christmas tree out there." Erin managed a thin smile. "Tell me we still have a bird left to fly tomorrow." "She's got holes in the armor, scorch marks on the fuselage, and you cooked the cannon barrels, but yeah, she's still good." Before she could climb down, a voice cut through the background noise. "Captain Hawk, with me." Colonel Sam Bennett stood a few feet away, his arms crossed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that never gave away more than he wanted. Erin knew better than to read his tone yet. She followed him across the tarmac, toward the operations building. The weight of the mission was catching. Up with her now, her legs felt heavier, her shoulders aching from hours in the cockpit. Inside, the air was cool, humming with fluorescent lights. Bennett led her straight into the debrief room. A screen on the far wall showed a satellite map of the canyon area. Red dots marked enemy positions. Blue markers tracked the SEAL team's movement. A duty officer sat at the console, looking up as they entered. "Colonel, Captain Hawk's gun camera feed is loaded." "Run it," Bennett said. The screen came alive with the view from her A-10's nose camera. The footage showed the initial strafing run brilliant flashes as 30mm shells found their marks, enemy fighters scattering. The room was silent, except for the cannon's roar, echoing through the speakers. When the playback ended, Bennett turned to her. "You want to explain why you went in without escort, against direct standing orders?" Erin kept her gaze steady. "Sir, Blackjack 2-1's team was pinned down, outnumbered, and cut off. There was no time to wait for support. I had the angle, the ammunition, and the altitude to get in fast." "That's not the point," Bennett said, his voice sharpening. "The point is, you risked your aircraft, your life, and by extension, this squadron's operational capability. You step out of formation like that, you invite disaster." She leaned forward slightly. "Sir, with respect, doing nothing would have been the bigger disaster. You saw the feed. They wouldn't have lasted another 5 minutes." Bennett studied her, his jaw working. He didn't respond right away, and the silence stretched. Finally, he turned to the duty officer. "Clear the room." Once they were alone, his voice dropped. "I get it, Hawk, I do. Hell, I've bent a few rules myself in the field. But this wasn't just a choice. You've put me in a position where command will want answers. And they won't care about the SEALs. They'll care about why one of my best pilots disobeyed standing orders." Erin felt a flicker of frustration. "Then tell them the truth. Tell them I saved 6 men's lives today." "Saving lives isn't always the same as following the mission plan," he said. They stared at each other for a moment, neither blinking, neither backing down. And Bennett sighed, rubbing his temples. "You'll write up a full report tonight. Everything. Times, coordinates, ammo count. And Hawk." "Yes, sir?" "Don't expect a medal for this one. Best you can hope for is they let it slide." She nodded, though inside she felt a stubborn pride. She hadn't done it for medals anyway. Later, in the squadron-ready room, Erin sat alone at a desk, the glow of her laptop casting a pale light across her face. She typed her report with surgical precision, facts only, no embellishment. Still, each line brought the images back. The SEALs running for their lives, the desert wind buffeting her cockpit, the sickening moment when the missile lock alarm screamed in her ears. Halfway through, she paused as her phone buzzed. The caller. "ID was restricted," she answered. "Captain Hawk?" A deep voice asked. "Yes. This is Mason. You don't know me, but I was the one calling for air support today. On behalf of my team, on behalf of Wilkes, you have our thanks. We heard you caught some flack for going in alone." Erin allowed herself a quiet smile. "Something like that." "Well," Mason continued, "for what it's worth, 6 men are walking out of this because you didn't wait for permission. We won't forget it." The line clicked dead before she could respond. She sat back, staring at the ceiling for a long moment. Whatever reprimand was coming, it couldn't take away the knowledge that she'd made the right call. Outside, the night airbase was alive with the distant whine of jet engines, the clank of tools in the hangars, and the low murmur of crews preparing for tomorrow's missions. Somewhere in that darkness, she knew the SEALs were on their way back to safety. And for Erin Hawk, that was enough. 3 days after the Canyon mission, Erin Hawk was summoned to the operations conference room. The message had been short and cold. "Report to Ops at 0900. Bring your mission notes." She knew what it meant. This was no routine debrief. The corridor leading to Ops was unusually quiet. Pilots who normally greeted her with a nod or a grin avoided eye contact. Some glanced at her with sympathy. Others with the kind of wary respect reserved for someone walking into a fight they might not win. Inside the conference room, a long table dominated the space. At the far end sat Colonel Bennett, his expression unreadable. Beside him were two officers from higher command, both in crisp uniforms, both strangers. One, a Navy commander with sharp eyes, tapped a pen against a key. Closed folder. The other, an Air Force colonel with a regulation-perfect haircut, scrolled through something on a tablet. Bennett gestured toward a chair halfway down the table. "Captain Hawk, take a seat." She sat, spine straight, notes in hand. The Air Force colonel looked up from his tablet. "Captain, I'm Colonel Ferris. This is Commander Holt. We're conducting a formal review of your actions on the 14th. You are aware this review could lead to disciplinary action?" "Yes, sir." "Then let's start with your own account." Erin opened her notebook. At 14:32 hours, I received an urgent close air support request from a SEAL team operating in the vicinity of Grid 7 Echo. My wing was at 12,000 feet, engaged in holding pattern while awaiting further orders. I assessed that the SEAL team situation was immediately life-threatening. They were outnumbered and receiving concentrated fire from at least 3 enemy positions. Given this terrain, they had no viable escape route without air cover. I judged that waiting for escort would result in their elimination before support arrived. Ferris didn't interrupt, but Holt leaned forward. "You judged?" "Captain, are you trained in SEAL tactics?" "No, sir. I'm trained to recognize when friendly forces are about to be overrun. That's universal." Ferris's gaze sharpened. "You do understand that standing orders exist for a reason. Flying at treetop level into a hostile zone without escort isn't just risky. It's reckless." Erin kept her voice even. "Sir, I understand. But in that specific situation, the greater risk was inaction." Bennett cleared his throat. "Colonels, if I may." Ferris raised a hand. "Noted, Bennett. We're here to determine if Captain Hawk's decision was justified, or if she will face formal reprimand. That's all." The questioning dragged on for nearly an hour. Coordinates, ammunition counts, radio transcripts. Each answer Erin gave was met with another precise, almost surgical inquiry. By the end, her voice felt raw, but she hadn't flinched once. Finally, Holt closed his folder. "Captain Hawk, you are excused. We will notify you of our decision." She rose, gave a sharp salute, and walked out without letting her pace quicken. The hallway outside felt heavier now, as though the building itself was holding its breath. Back in the squadron-ready room, she found her friend and fellow pilot, Lieutenant Jake "Trigger" Lawson, leaning against a table. "They tear you apart?" he asked. "They tried." Jake smirked. "Word is, you've got some unexpected friends in high places. There's a rumor." Before he could finish, the door opened and a figure stepped in. Erin froze. It was Mason, the SEAL team leader, whose voice she'd heard over the radio during the mission. He looked exactly as she imagined. Tall, lean, eyes that missed nothing. He was in civilian clothes now, but carried himself like a man still in combat mode. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and held out his hand. "Captain Hawk." She shook it. "Mason, I didn't expect. We just flew in," he said, cutting her off. "Me and 3 others from the team. We heard they were giving you grief for saving our skins. Thought we'd make sure they understood what happened out there." "You're not exactly in their chain of command," Erin said with a faint smile. "No," Mason agreed, "but sometimes it helps when the people you saved show up in person." An hour later, they were in Bennett's office. Mason stood beside Erin, hands in his pockets, while Bennett made the introductions to Ferris and Holt, who had clearly not expected visitors. Mason spoke plainly. "With all due respect, Captain Hawk didn't just assist us. She made the difference between 6 body bags and 6 men walking out alive. We were minutes from being overrun. I called for air because I had no other option. She answered, alone, and in doing so neutralized threats we couldn't have taken ourselves without losing half the team. That's the truth. Ferris shifted uncomfortably. Commander Holt and I appreciate the perspective, but Mason didn't let him finish. You can put all the rules you want on paper, but when rounds are flying and your people are trapped, you pray someone up there has the guts to break the script. Captain Hawk did. And I'll go on record with that anywhere you need me to. The room was quiet for a long moment. Bennett's lips twitched in what might have been the faintest smile. When the SEALs left, Aaron followed them outside. Mason paused at the base of the steps. I've been doing this a long time, Hawk. You get pilots who follow orders and pilots who save lives. The world needs both. But the guys who were with me that day, they'll never forget you're the second kind. She didn't know what to say to that, so she simply nodded. By the end of the day, the official decision still hadn't come. But Aaron had the sense that the tide had shifted. The weight of doom. Command's disapproval was still there. But now, so was the weight of 6 living men's testimony. And she knew which one she valued more. The next morning, the base seemed unusually quiet. Aaron had slept little, replaying the inquiry in her head. The words reckless and against protocol kept colliding with saved lives until she didn't know which weighed more. Heavily. At 0830, she was called to Colonel Bennett's office. A summons was direct, no explanation. She arrived on time, her uniform pressed, boots polished, an expression unreadable. Bennett was waiting, arms folded. Ferris and Holt sat across from his desk, their posture rigid. Between them was a single envelope. Bennett gestured to the chair in front of him. Captain Hawk, sit. She did. The envelope sat there like a live round on the table. Colonel Ferris spoke first. Captain Hawk, after reviewing mission logs, RADIO transcripts, and multiple witness statements, including those from Navy personnel involved in the operation, we have reached a decision. Aaron kept her gaze steady. Ferris continued, your actions on the 14th were in direct violation of standing operational procedures. They were also executed without coordination or escort, placing both you and your aircraft in extreme jeopardy. The pause that followed felt long enough for her pulse to count each second. However, Holt said, leaning forward, given the circumstances, the immediate threat to U.S. personnel on the ground, and the outcome of your intervention, we have concluded that your actions were justified. Bennett's mouth twitched. Which means, Captain, you are not being reprimanded. In fact, Ferris slid the envelope toward her. Aaron opened it carefully. Inside was a commendation letter, bearing the words Distinguished Flying Cross. Recommended. For a moment, she didn't move. The weight of the paper in her hands felt heavier than its size should allow. This is unexpected, she admitted. It shouldn't be, Bennett said. You made a judgment call, and you made it right. That doesn't mean you can ignore protocol in the future, but it does mean we recognize what you did. Holt added, understand this, Captain, this commendation is as much about politics as heroism. The SEALs went to bat for you. Their word carries weight. You've earned their respect, and in this line of work, that's rare currency. Aaron left the office with the envelope still in her hand. Outside, the air felt clearer somehow. The sun was rising higher, casting a sharp light over the tarmac where her A-10 was parked. Jake Trigger Lawson was waiting by the hangar. Well? He asked. She held up the envelope. No court-martial. No reprimand. Jake grinned. Told you they wouldn't have the stones to burn you for saving SEALs. Before she could answer, she heard a familiar voice. Hey, Hawk. Mason stood a few yards away, hands in his pockets, the easy confidence of someone who'd already fought his war and won. She walked over. You still here? Leaving soon, he said. But before I go, I wanted to make an offer. She raised an eyebrow. An offer? My team's got another op in 3 weeks. Different theater, different terrain. We've been pushing to have a dedicated air asset assigned. Someone who understands what it's like to be in the mud with us, not just above it. You're at the top of the list. Aaron blinked. You're talking about embedding in A-10. With a SEAL unit? Mason shrugged. Call it what you want. All I know is, we need someone we can trust to fly in when things go bad. I already told my C. Oh, you're that pilot. She hesitated. This sounds unofficial, he smirked. Unofficial is sometimes the only way to get things done. Think about it. As he turned to leave, she called after him. Mason, why? Me? He glanced back. Because when everyone else followed the rules, you followed your gut. That's the kind of backup we need. Later that afternoon, Erin sat alone in the cockpit of her Warthog. She ran her hands over the controls, the familiar hum of the systems filling the cabin. Outside, the world was calm, the kind of calm that never lasted long in her line of work. She thought about the inquiry, the commendation, the offer from Mason. 3 weeks wasn't long. But she knew the truth. There wasn't a part of her that would say no. Flying low into danger wasn't about glory. It wasn't about medals or commendations. It was about being there when people needed you most, whether or not the manual approved. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the base in gold and shadow, she felt a quiet certainty settle in her chest. Next time, there would be no hesitation.